select Luke Kennard from Duke University.
Bang! Samaje Christian, 3.
All right, guys, we're live with another episode of the Triple Double Podcast. I'm Corey Albertson of Triple Double Prospects. As always, Jason Morrow of 270 Hoops is here, our producer. And today we've got a guest not from high school basketball, not from college basketball, but from the NBA. Our guest today is Alex Kline. Alex, what's the word?
Hey, Corey, I'm great. Glad to be here, and appreciate you having me.
Good deal, man. We appreciate you coming on. So let's give you the brief rundown of Alex. At age 15, Alex created the Recruit Scoop, which for those who are newer to basketball is a website and then a huge social media presence which predates what is now Verbal Commits, which is a huge resource for players and college coaches as to which schools have offered which kids or recruiting which kids and whatnot. The Recruit Scoop was really one of the first places on the internet to really consolidate all that information. That led Alex to a spot on the Forbes 30 under 30 list, Sports Edition. And it also helped him with his project of the Mary Klein Classic, which it was an all-star basketball game, which raised over 6 figures for cancer research. Right now, Alex is involved as a basketball operations assistant with the New Orleans Pelicans. Did I get everything?
No, you did a heck of a job with the bio. You really did. I appreciate that. It's been a fun journey, and really excited to see, where the next, decade takes me. I remember getting into this business now, and I'm 24, so it's really been just about a decade, and it's been a really fun one. A lot of great relationships, a lot of great memories.
That's great, man. If you're 24, that feels like it makes me about 50, but I remember when you were so young. But I guess I'm still somewhat young. But, we're here today. Like I talked to you, we want to talk about NBA front office life. Just as so many of our podcasts here, I think this is our 22nd, have been college related, high school related, scouting related, recruiting, different things. And what I want to talk about is NBA front office. I want to talk about the draft process and the scouting within the draft, how it's different than college, some of the analytics and whatnot. But before I get to that, why don't you give us the rundown of kind of what made you decide to get into basketball? At a young age, you took on an entrepreneurial role and starting your own thing in the Recruit Scoop, and how that's led you to an internship and then eventually a full-time gig in the NBA.
So growing up, my mother was sick from ages 5 to 10. She had cancer. So I didn't really get to live a normal childhood and didn't really get to have a lot of friends. So as a result, I was playing football and baseball and, really wasn't that great a player. I stunk at basketball, and I really wanted to be a part of something once I got to high school, and really wanted to have people around me and just, a family. And, when you're around a basketball team, you really do become a part of a family if the culture is right and everything like that. So for me, I became the manager of our high school basketball team, which was also linked with our AAU basketball team. And, I started out, sweeping the floors and filling up the water cups, washing the uniforms, all the grunt work. And to be perfectly honest with you, Corey, I loved it. I had a lot of fun. It was a really great experience for me those 4 years. Through that, though, I think there was a little bit of pressure on me, like, hey, you got to get serious about something. You've got to figure out what it is that you're going to do in this basketball world. You've got the players, and they're ultimately going to go off to college and maybe play professionally. But, for you, what are you going to do? So, the more you're around this, the more you go to events, the more you see all the different people involved. So I co-started a media website, later transitioned that into my own basketball website, and eventually, because of Twitter and how that took off during that time, 10 years ago, it led to, just an opportunity through tweeting out players' recruitment and everything like that to build the trust of the players. And, once you have the trust of the players who are the same age as me, You had, an opportunity to get to know all their coaches on the high school and AAU circuit. You had the opportunity to get to know college coaches, agents, sneaker people, really the whole industry. And, I had done that for a while and, gotten really popular in that, and ultimately decided after a while that, hey, I can only go so far with this. I got to Rivals by the time I got to high school, or by the time I finished high school and got to college. And I just felt like, you know what, I've enjoyed this ride so much. So ultimately ended up doing it all of high school and all of college. So for those 8 years, and then figured, halfway through college, like, let's try something different. Let's try a new challenge. And I got on as an intern at the NBA Summer League, and really for those 2 weeks got to see what the NBA life was like, and got to know some NBA folks. And, you never really know how these people run their business and how front office does things and what goes into scouting. And I didn't realize how valuable, knowing the grassroots and high school scene was, and knowing these kids and knowing everything about them and who's involved in their life and everything like that. So, went out to probably 10 different NBA cities and facilities and got to know these people and sent them some work, and, just tried to find a way in. And ultimately one day, got an opportunity with New Orleans right before college ended. And it's been 3 drafts now. So I just finished my 3rd draft with those guys, and it's been a really fun transition. But it's funny when, you go from something that, you're just passionate about and it's fun and you're just kind of enjoying, to now all of a sudden a decade later, it's become your full-time job and your life. And it remains pretty fun. It remains pretty fun. Obviously it's different than when I was a high school manager and when I was, running my event, and when I was, covering recruiting and everything, but it's still so fun and so unique. And I just love the different challenges that come with it. And, most importantly, the people that you meet along the way. I mean, you rarely remember, the 73rd game of the year, but you more so remember, an interaction with someone, or, a bus ride somewhere, or, a dinner somewhere. So those are the fun moments in the industry. But yeah, that's kind of my journey, I guess you could say.
Well, it's an interesting journey, and it starts with, you took a chance on yourself. And, I'm someone that comes from a line of entrepreneurs, and, some of my family has had tremendous success and tremendous failure as entrepreneurs. And, I think I've had a similar journey, and you've had a similar journey, and, trying different stuff, going out on your own, doing it. Both of us have taken it to a platform of like a national scouting company and working with them. And, there's some advantages and disadvantages, but there's nothing like your own baby, the thing that you created. And, at your age, when you created that, you have such a unique perspective in that, more so than evaluating talent at that age in high school. Because there's so many guys that do that, especially you being from the Northeast. I mean, there's so many New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania guys out there evaluating talent, but you knew, and college coach could hit you up on who's recruiting the kid, who's the kid really interested in, what's the kid looking for, who is the kid going to go for advice, mom, dad, grandma, high school coach, AAU coach, etc. And that's kind of what you really created. And, like I said, I really liken what you did to what eventually has become a solid business model with verbal commits, and that, you allowed different people from fans, much like Rivals did in a different type of way years before, to experience the recruiting process, to understand more about how it works, and to really follow it and make basketball a year-round thing on the college level, not just a winter thing that is sandwiched in between football and baseball.
No, I appreciate that. And I think, the thing that I always took away from it was, one, do right by the kid in giving them exposure and making phone calls for them and helping them where they need it. I always got a lot of pleasure out of just, a kid reaches out to you, hey, do you think you could help me with this school or that school? And yeah, sure, absolutely. And sometimes you have to be honest with them and realistic, like, hey, I don't think you're there yet. And that's where, I was fortunate in that I did have some, real friendships with these people where they would listen and you learn from your mistakes too. Sometimes you're wrong on kids, obviously most times you're wrong on kids. And then, the other thing is you have to appreciate all types of players. So it's easy to regurgitate the top 100 players in the country. It really is. But to write about, the mid-major kid heading to Drexel, the, low major kid going to the, Ohio Valley Conference. I think there's a real appreciation there from both, our side as writers, as well as, the kid and the coach and the family, because at the end of the day, it's tough now to find so many of these kids. You're not really sure, hey, what makes this kid a mid-major prospect? What makes this kid a low major, maybe high D2 prospect? So, as you can understand and appreciate, it's more than just covering the Julius Randles and Andrew Wiggins and Jabari Parkers of the world.
Right. And it's a people business at the end of the day. And, when you were 15 and, even now and even, myself and even people who've been in this for 50 years, like a Van Coleman or something, there's always people who are better basketball minds. There's millions of people in this country who are great basketball minds that are probably equipped to evaluate talent. But what you did in creating an opportunity for yourself at a young age was you opened doors for yourself by reaching out and creating relationships. And that's ultimately what this thing is all about. Knowing all the basketball in the world doesn't do anything to you if you can't further that for somebody else and then in turn further it for yourself in your own career. And, reaching out to college coaches is not something that's necessarily easy. But, once you can develop a brand and get some recognition, I mean, it's just unbelievable how much it can explode. And then, being at a young age like that, you can create an opportunity for yourself to be so recognizable, compared to some of your competition. And that's great. But, let's shift to the NBA, which is what we want to talk about here. Again, you're the first, professional basketball guy that we've got on the podcast. And I want to start off by asking you just a real broad question, which is your title with the Pelicans is basketball operations assistant. So what do you do on a day-to-day basis in terms of front office stuff in the NBA?
Yeah, so in the NBA, there's, I guess, two different forms of basketball operations assistant. One is the more administrative side of being the special assistant to the general manager. It's booking the flights, expense reports, all the administrative stuff. The other side of the basketball operations assistant is really, being a scout. Sometimes just people use different terminology. But what I do on a day-to-day basis is the, preparation for the draft, 24/7, year-round preparation for the draft, as well as preparation for free agency and trades and the trade deadline. Just in that, one, we want to know everything about these players on and off the court. We want to know what, the coaches think of them. We want to know what different people who are, around the kids and around the players think of them, just, in all areas. And, the other part to my job is then planning out travel, planning out games, who am I really targeting? Who are the top, freshmen coming in? Who are the top returning sophomores, juniors, seniors? Who are guys that, are can't miss guys? Who are guys that, we need to take a look at the mid-major level? And really just knowing college basketball inside and out, and then being able to have the opportunity during the year either to watch these guys on film and follow along closely, or, hey, you know what? I have an opportunity to watch them in person at this game. Let's schedule it out. So, by the end of September, I've typically got my entire schedule for the year planned out, and you add games here and there. But the biggest thing is making sure that you get to see as many teams as possible who are in your area and who come through. So it can be a lot, but it's a lot of fun at the end of the day, Corey. You really have a chance to build relationships with coaches and, get to see these practices and shoot arounds and games. And you really learn so much about the game. And then I think most importantly, when it comes to evaluation and my whole thing, obviously so much of the time is spent on the college front, but I think it's also watching professional basketball games, watching NBA games, and being able to really understand what goes into an NBA point guard, a shooting guard, a small forward, power forward, center, and seeing what they do and how it translates, when I'm watching said player on Seton Hall or said player on Ohio State, and figuring out, okay, this is why they can make it, because they remind me of this guy and they do this one thing specifically really well, but they also do, a couple other things as well. So I think, you're always watching games, you're always writing reports, you're always making calls. And I think, to be honest, I mean, anyone can do this. It really comes down to listening, your research, your work ethic, your relationships. So I'm not doing anything special here. I think more or less, this role is just effort and hustle, and it's a lot.
Well,
of
that
fun.
leads
So,
me to kind of my next question here is, I think when people think about NBA people, there's a misunderstanding of how guys get into that industry if you're not a former NBA player. And, what is the difference between what you do and what a full-time traveling scout that sees, 365 live games a year, traveling all over the world potentially? What's the difference between what you guys do? What are some misconceptions? And then really more than anything, what is the typical background for guys that are working in type of positions like you're in the NBA?
yeah, so every NBA team does it differently. There's advanced scouting where a lot of that is on the coaching staff, and they're going to, figure out the play calls and figure out, how to game plan for, Portland or Cleveland or whatever team they're playing in the next couple of days or weeks. Then you have
which is highly technical basketball.
Oh,
people don't
God,
understand how structured college and NBA basketball gets.
Oh my God, yeah, I would never want that job. I mean, if you got to take it, you got to take it. But yeah, advanced scouting is a different animal. Then, college scouting, some teams they'll have 2 national scouts, other teams they'll have regional, and they'll go to a bunch of games and really try and figure out, who they like from their region. And, then you have more influential people in the organization higher up who will make sure that they hit everything. So it's just, it's accountability. All those guys are full-time typically. And then you have your directors who, are the ones obviously in the office and making sure that they go and make their rounds. And then typically we have an international scout or two. From our breakdown, at least, we have a West Coast scout, we have a Southeast scout, we have me in the Northeast, and then we have an international scout in Israel. And then we have a number of different scouts and people all around in our office who do other things as well. So it's a really impressive group. It puts in a lot of effort and time and work.
Touch on how people get into that. And before you do that, let me start you off with this. When I was a freshman student manager at Cincinnati, my roommate was a senior student manager, and he was deciding what he wanted to get into. And I don't know how I remember this. This is weird, just talking to you brings this one up, but he was thinking, what do I want to do? And he had some buddies who had gotten into the NBA side. So he was like, well, maybe I'll get into the NBA. And we pulled up some NBA job board, and he was like, oh, this looks pretty cool. And then he's like, part of the application was to submit a statistical model on shooting. And we started reading through this, and we're like, man, we went to Cincinnati. We didn't go to Harvard or Yale. Some of the math on it was unbelievable. So, I mean, do you have to do that stuff? And like, again, what is the background like for a lot of these front office guys?
Yeah, so, when it comes to applying for these jobs, it's not like in college basketball where you're going to go on Hoop Dirt or you're going to see, something appear on Twitter. Occasionally you'll hear breaking news on, the assistant GM being the GM or whatever. Like for the lower level positions, it's really tough because you don't really know until you talk to people. That was my biggest thing. I had to figure out who do I talk to, and then you reach out to different teams. And once you have built a relationship with these guys, they'll actually tell you, hey, I heard so-and-so left to go here. You may want to check in on this, or sometimes they create it for you. So the typical background, you have a lot of ex-managers, a lot of ex-GAs who get in as far as non-playing guys. Most recently, a number of recruiting folks, myself, Dave Tellep, Reggie Rankin have gotten in. I know a lot of people are now trying to do the recruiting thing and then eventually go into the NBA, and then, with one and done coming to an end at some point in the next couple of years, who knows? I think more and more people are going to try and push that route and push that envelope. But there are a lot of guys with, video experience, analytical experience. At the end of the day, typically the guys who are hired are the ones who can play a certain role. So, your hardworking, gritty individual, they're going to either the video room or they're going to be the one who's the administrative guy who, takes the food orders and who, does the dry cleaning runs and, does anything that the higher ups really need. Then, you have more of the statistical people who, they're going to build out your analytics. And they're going to, serve both the coaching staff and the front office. Then on the scouting side, it's guys who have the experience and guys who have the contacts and, even guys who have worked their way up. Again, a lot of ex-managers and ex-graduate assistants, as well as, former college coaches.
And then you need the people, the guys who are good at talking to people, the guys who are good at building relationships.
For sure. That's exactly it.
I think I've told this story on a podcast before, but when I was a manager at Cincinnati, there was a guy who's now in the front office with the Thunder. I can't remember his name or his exact title now, but he was just a lowly scout back then in, probably 2009, 2008. And he came to a practice to evaluate a couple of our guys at Cincinnati. And, he came over and just started talking to the managers, introducing himself, finding out, this guy who we're here to watch, who is, is he the first one at practice? Is he the last one at practice? Is he the first to leave? Does he ever pretend to be hurt? Does he treat the managers well? Does he treat the training staff well, et cetera, et cetera? And I mean, that's the type of, people that you have to, continue to move up in the NBA game, I would think.
Oh, without a doubt. No, you need someone who is a type A personality or at least can turn it on and is willing to go the extra mile. Typically, we want to be the first ones in the gym and we want to be the last ones in the gym because you want to see everything, you want to hear everything, you want to see all the interactions, and you want to talk to as many people as possible. So when we check out a game, when we check out a practice or a shoot around, I mean, it really is an all-day thing. You try and be there as long as possible. You really try and build relationships. You try and hit on the right questions. You get everyone's, you give out your business card. You get everyone's phone number. And whether it's, for that day or 4 years later, you just try and figure out everything you can about the kid. But it really is a long process.
It's a great point. And, the people wouldn't guess, and it's absolutely true, of course, is that, guys who are going to scout an NBA or NBA guys who are going to scout a college game, they're going to be there for the shoot around 4 hours before the game. Then they're going to go spend time with the coaches. And, they might try and hang around the locker room a little bit. They're going to go watch the game. They're not going to leave right after the game. And they're really trying to get the whole experience of what goes with it, because the guys that they're looking for aren't just going to be playing basketball. They're going to be part of the NBA, and the NBA is about more than basketball. The NBA is a business, and it requires, more than a 40-hour work week and devoting to dealing with media, dealing with community outreach, dealing with business partners, business managers, agents, all that stuff. And, the NBA scouts that I've talked to over the years, it's just interesting, they go and they're always trying to work. You're always trying to find a guy, and they might say a guy that's, a skinny 6'10" freshman. They're like, oh yeah, that's a guy we're gonna write him down. We're gonna see him in a year, and maybe he's good for the draft 3 years from now.
We're always planning ahead. The sad thing and the scary thing is once once the draft ends, the next day you're looking at the next group of guys. Even this year, we finished June 23rd, I think it was, and the following week I was up late for some reason, couldn't fall asleep, and I'm going through all these, statistics and everything like that on college basketball, and I'm finding, okay, here are my sleepers. Here are my analytical sleepers for next year. And it's a crazy process, but it's an addicting one because you're always trying to stay a step ahead. Yes, we know who a lot of these top players are, but we're trying to figure out, who are the guys no one else is talking about? Who are the guys that, mid-year, all of a sudden we're going to start hearing about, and it's like, great, I knew about him beforehand. I made
and
some calls about him beforehand.
That's exactly what I do on the college level. It's funny, and that.
Yep.
I had a college coach this year. He finished his, what is this, the 2018 recruiting class, and he texted me and he said, we just signed a kid. We just got a commitment from a kid. He's going to complete our 2018 class. We're going to work on 2019. But by the way, when are you releasing your first list of 2021s? And this was like September, and they're freshmen. I'm like, oh man, give us a second here. But you're right, it never ends. So let's talk about the draft then. So what specifically, I know in terms of compiling lists, but once your GM and your staff decide, here are the guys that we think we're at least semi-interested in the draft, what is your role then in moving forward with those guys before they come in and work out in terms of research?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's calling anyone and everyone who is connected with the kids. I think you have two different types of sources. You have the sources who directly know the kid and work with them and have coached him and, may have a certain bias to him because at the end of the day, if that kid does well, then their program does well, or they can make a little money or whatever. And sometimes that source isn't always going to be honest about everything, but they can provide you with a lot of background and what mom and dad do and, where the kid comes from and everything like that. Because you want to know about a kid from when they were, as young as possible. And then you have another type of source, which is, they don't know the kid as well, but they've been around them. They've heard things about them. They've heard rumors, either good or bad. And I think you kind of need a variety of both types of sources. That way, you hear all these different things and eventually rumors.
Well, and I think
so many of our guys like so many. Here you go.
Well, no, I think it's interesting, and I mean, so many of these things are non-basketball, and I mean that's where you guys have to be so meticulous. And when you've called me in the past, I think one of the real themes when you've asked me about different guys, and the guys you ask me about tend to be guys who come from Ohio. That maybe they go to college in Ohio, maybe they don't, but they come from Ohio, and now 4 years later or 1 year later, maybe if it's a 5-star guy, it's time for them to test the draft waters. You're asking how are they going to handle success? So what is their support system and background like in terms of they're going to have a lot of money in their hands? Are they going to continue to work hard? Are they more worried about being a great player than the money? Do they smoke? Do they party, et cetera, et cetera?
And I think, because we can't watch these guys in high school, we're not going to focus on them as much. So it's important to talk to the people who have been around them from 8th grade, freshman year on to senior year, because these guys, it's a totally different, maturization process. Who you were as a freshman is rarely who you are as a senior. These guys go through the process where, and I remember covering them where, freshman, you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and you love the attention and you want more and more and more. And by junior year, you're kind of grumpy about it because now everyone's bothering you and you've made it and you're big time. You got the Kentucky offer, you got the Duke offer. And then by senior year, you're ready to get to college. You're cutting everyone out. You're changing your phone number. So for us, it's trying to figure out, where did you start and where have you progressed to? Were you that guy who was the top 30, power forward, and now you're no longer ranked because you were 6'6" at the time and never grew? Or are you the guy who no one really knew about and somehow just blew up junior year of high school and AAU, and that was because of a great work ethic and toughness and everything like that. So we're always looking for the intangibles, but I think you always want to have a story on some player. You always want to figure out what's this guy's story. Everyone has one, but their story can really sell them at the end of the day. Why are they the way they are, and how did they get there? So it's so important to know how they matured over the years.
Right, but at the end of the day, then your job, when it all comes down to it, is to find talent, and everybody's going to have some question mark. I mean, we just talked on a previous podcast. We just brushed on the NBA draft real quickly, and I was talking about how it's almost comical, like even guys like a DeAndre Ayton or a Marvin Bagley, the top 2 picks a month ago. It's like even at the end, they're getting nitpicked so thoroughly. It's almost like you're even wondering if they're even good anymore. There's so many negative things. And, when I look at this year's draft, I'm not asking you to talk about any players, but just from a broad scope, you look at Michael Porter Jr., and everybody said, well, his problem is that he's had a lot of injuries, which is undeniable. And then you look at the kid that the Celtics got, Robert Williams from Texas A&M, and everybody said, well, he's got some maturity problems. So you look at that, you say everybody's got a problem. And how true is it in the NBA that if you're going to make it, you have to be better than the sum of your problems?
Yeah, I think there are some parts that, you can work with. I think at the end of the day, Corey, whether it's the NBA or, working as a recruiting analyst or, being a server at TGI Fridays, like it comes down to your character and your selflessness and your work ethic. So if you're going to work hard at something, people are going to want to invest in you because that's how you've made it. That's how I've made it. That's how so many people have made it, because maybe they're not the most talented, but shoot, they work hard. And your work ethic is something that rarely ever changes, just like your motor. It rarely ever changes. And if you're motivated by money, that's probably an issue. That's probably an issue. And the same thing goes for character. I think guys who are good teammates, who are, good to their coaches, they listen, they're good in the community. Like you want that. And typically I'd say, majority of the guys in the NBA are like that. But then you're going to have guys every so often who, they're really talented, but man, they got some issues. They got some issues.
Well, it's got to be hard it's got to be hard at the NBA level to cut out all the distraction. I mean, that's got to be,
for sure.
That focus has got to be a huge, huge thing. And I mean, that's something that we can't relate to into how to deal with that.
No, for sure. And that's where you got to figure out the circle. But most importantly, I think it's the work ethic, because if the individual never really enjoyed doing what they did and they did it for financial benefits, now they're getting paid, where's the motivation?
I'll tell you, going to John Lucas camp over the years, we just had Brian Merritt on the podcast recently, who was one of the guys who really ran John's camp. And I remember John one time talking about how NBA players, this is a compliment. It sounds like a negative, but it's a compliment. And that NBA players have to be the most selfish individuals. And what that means is you have to take every free moment you have and constantly find ways to get better. And he said that in the context of they do at John Lucas camp what they do at many top college basketball programs in the country, and I'm sure all pro programs, which they have what they call pre-practice. And pre-practice is, that 30 minutes, hour, and the pros is probably longer before practice, where the court is open and you can get out on the court with the coaches, and you're really only working on individual skill set, that selfish stuff to help you make you a better player. And, John talked about how the NBA players are so selfish, and if there's anything that they can soak up from somebody else to improve their game, they're going to take advantage of that. And the reason they're going to take advantage of that is very simple. The more I know, every tool I can add to my game lengthens my career. The longer my career is, the more money I can make and the better I'm going to set up my family. And you said that, guys have to be about more than the money, and there's no question that's true. But at the end of the day, everybody wants to make the NBA because you have a chance to take care of your family for generations financially.
Oh, without a doubt, Corey. And I think, listening is a skill. It really is. Coachability is a skill. I think most fans probably don't realize this, but when it comes down to guys getting better, everyone's kissing your butt essentially. Everyone's telling you how great you are. How are you going to get better when you're this top high school senior and you haven't made it to college yet? How are you going to find the motivation to get in the gym and to work before practice and after practice? Like that's tough. But it's the guys who are willing learners and willing to listen to the coach and willing to accept criticism that end up being really successful because they are never content. They always want to learn more. And, there's a reason why so many of these guys are so successful.
Well, let's, I want to shift here towards the last thing I want to talk to you about, which is this. So, when you look at college scouting, you're someone who's been around college scouting. From guys like me that are scouting high school kids, you see that everybody I know of takes the approach of assigning a level to a kid. So that level might be mid-major Division I, it might be Division II, it might be whatever. In the NBA, when I follow stuff with pre-draft stuff and reading inside scoop stuff or talking to a few NBA scouts like yourself, I hear more of a conversation about not what level is a kid, because obviously the NBA is all one level, but what is that player's floor and what is that player's ceiling? So explain to the people who aren't familiar what that is and how you guys use that in your draft process.
Yeah, no. So, the ceiling is how good can they be? The floor is
best case scenario.
Yeah. At their worst, where are they going to be? So best case scenario, worst case scenario. And then there's got to be that realistic, hey, this is what if we were to put our money on it, this is where we'd have them. And then typically you're going to have, guys, are they a core player? Are they the star player? Are they, your franchise player? Are they more of rotation? Are they more of a roster piece? Are they more of a developmental piece? Are they more of a minor league piece? Are they someone who they aren't someone who you want on your roster for whatever reason? And it's figuring out, what role you really see them in. Do you see this guy as more of a 3-and-D guy who's your backup small forward? Or is he someone who, you believe in him and you have him as a potential starter? So I think for us, it's figuring out, and it's a great way of, figuring out in a couple of years where and why. It's a great way for us to measure how accurate we were, as opposed to saying, yeah, he's really good, he's going to make it, he'll be a Hall of Fame player, or he's not going to make it.
You've got to do a balancing act between, you tend to see a lot of the young guys, especially the one and done kids. You tend to say, well, they have a very high ceiling. They could be an all-star level player, but they also have a very low floor. They could be a complete bust. Then you look at the college player guy who's been there for 4 years, like a Javon Carter, maybe from Memphis. His ceiling might not be real high, but his floor isn't real low. You pretty much have a good gauge on, you have so much information over the years on what you think he's going to do. So, how do you guys balance out, deciding if you want to roll the dice or not?
Yeah, and that's where you've got to figure out, with the current state of your roster, is this a team that is making a push to the playoffs? Is this a team that's rebuilding? Is this a team that, is one piece away? Or, hey, we're a championship roster, but shoot, we need someone who can fill in because we're not going to be able to re-sign the next guy. And I think, once you do the analytics, once you do the intel, once you do all the scouting, you can kind of figure out, hey, either we're going to go with the safe bet and the guy who he's probably going to be able to come in this year, make an impact and do so and, always be solid. Or you go for the guy who, he needs a couple of years in the G League. He needs some development, some summer league. But, if we can get him going, man, he could be something. And that's the debate every draft. Do you go best available or do you go with positional need? And that's a tough call. That
leads to my last question for you here. And that last question is this, going off what you just said. How do you evaluate the success of a draft? Can you do it at the end of the next year, Do you have to wait 2 years, 5 years? How do you know finally, yeah, we did well that draft? Or, maybe you could tell if you screwed up right away if you pass on a guy and they become an all-star player. But how do you really evaluate the success or failure of a specific draft that your team had?
Yeah, I think, one, you've got to rule out what the media and all the talking heads are saying, because, of course, after a couple games, they're going to say this kid's great or this kid's awful. And this is a 3-4 year process. And at the end of the day, you figure out when that rookie contract is up if you really like the kid or not. And sometimes you're like, we'll pass. Other times you're like, yep, we're taking him. We love him. Other times you're kind of on the fence, and that's how it's always going to be. But I think for the team, it's really just figuring out, one, is he who we expected he was going to be? Is he better than that? Is he worse? And that's, as a player, as a person, as a worker. But then it's also figuring out, does he really fit with what we're doing? And the toughest part, I think, can be, you change coaches, you change GMs, and that player's future can either, be hindered or can be enhanced because, the GM and the coach may have loved you, but they just got let go. Now the new guy comes in, he's really not a fan. He's not going to play you much, or he's not going to buy into you and give you an opportunity. So, unfortunately, a lot of this is luck, and people really do not understand that. A lot of this is luck and opportunity. You just so happen to be drafted by the right team with the right system. You're fighting as the third point guard. Oh, the backup point guard gets injured. You get your opportunity. They really like you. Okay, this is, it's all about luck and opportunity because, the top tier players are the top tier players for a reason. The starters are starters for a reason. The rotation guys, some are deserving. Others, they found a way in. There's 450 guys in the league, I believe. Those 250, those last 250, what about them got them in? And sometimes it's what we were talking about. It's the intangibles. It's the work ethic. It's the character. It's, okay, he's going to be our 15th man. Because, he helps the locker. He's great in practice. We see some upside in him. We really like him. And opportunity and luck. So when it comes to evaluating a draft, it takes a couple years. But, again, I often hear, and we often hear, oh, how is so-and-so in the league? It's their 8th year. They're a bum. Well, they made it 8 years. So they're pretty darn good if they've made it in the NBA 8 years.
That's so relatable in so many ways. And, we just had a guy on the podcast, Reggie Butler, who never played in the NBA but made it through some training camps. And, he found ways to get in training camps even when he wasn't invited just by kind of persevering. And it's so relatable what you said. And that, right, you can, again, extend your career. And how do you extend your career? Through work ethic, through attitude and whatnot. And that's relatable. The whole point of this, Alex, is educational tool. Hopefully there's parents and kids listening or young coaches listening and young scouts listening. And, they can learn here what the NBA is. It is so much of a business. But then again, they got, you can understand so is college. And there's so many similarities to what you said in the college game and the high school game. And, just like you want to be that coachable guy to get that spot in the NBA, that same guy at some point was doing that just to make the varsity team or just to put himself in position to be recruited by that school he really wanted to recruit him. So that was extremely informative information. We've been trying to set this up for a while. I know you were extremely busy with draft. You're extremely busy with summer league, and there's more summer league, and there's more draft stuff for next year to cover. So really, really appreciate having you on. And, I think our guests really, or our listeners really learned a lot today.
No, I appreciate you having me, Corey. Seriously, it's always a pleasure. I appreciate our friendship, and I'm glad you're doing this and being able to educate people because people need to know. They don't know.
I appreciate you, brother. Well, again, guys, that was Alex Kline, formerly of the Recruit Scoop, now a basketball operations assistant, meaning he works with a lot of NBA draft stuff for the New Orleans Pelicans. My name's Corey Albertson at Triple Double Prospects. For our producer, Jason Morrow of 270 Hoops, you guys listen to The 270. You guys listen to the Triple Double podcast. Thanks for listening.